All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials Are Old podcast. And you know what, Brian?
Yes.
I love politics and I love activism. Don't you?
I mean, I don't know. It's kind of been beaten down for the last 2 years. And I mean, doesn't really seem like there's any, path to power for people in my income. You know what? Sure. Yeah, I guess.
Well, I like it because I know the path to power. And I think it's pretending to be a different race and beating up everybody that you disagree with. But first, they have to kill like five of your guys, and then you get to like kick them in the face. That's the path to power as
Well,
a politically engaged person.
if I can just respond to that, Elizabeth Warren got creamed even worse than Bernie did in the primary. So you're wrong on that one. Second part, yeah, no, you're right. They should be drop kicking guys. They're never going to drop kick guys, and they're going to keep getting creamed.
I guarantee you, if Elizabeth Warren did a Hapkido kick on Joe Biden, she would have won the primaries. I
Oh,
guarantee
of course.
it.
Well, yeah, I would have voted for her. Fuck.
And speaking of fake Native Americans who do Hapkido kicks to politicians and scumbags, let's get into our review for this week. The
trial of Billy Jack.
Yes, the third movie in the Billy Jack franchise, of course. Now, Brian, this was your choice for this week's episode. Why did you want us to review The Trial of Billy Jack?
This movie, of course, has been on the docket. Any longtime listeners will know. Actually, Taylor and listeners of last week's episode will know. Kind of set me up for this, but it's good because I'd been meaning to come up to it fast. The Billy Jack movies are very important to me in my kind of vision, if you will, for this whole show. It's such a weird series. It's so important, and it's just kind of lost in like the sands of time. It's such a like crystallized piece of like boomer pop culture. It's so weird and it's so ambitious, and I don't think it could have existed at any time before or after. This is probably the weirdest movie in the series. It's also my favorite.
You know, Brian, we talk about weird and ambitious. I will agree. This movie is very weird and ambitious. It is very much both of those things.
Yeah. I think my initial thought this week during my viewings was, oh, I wonder if this movie is crazier because Tom Laughlin was emboldened by the success of the previous Billy Jack film. But the more I think about it, I don't really think so. I think this is exactly the movie he would have made if the previous two films had absolutely bombed.
I guarantee that as well, because the thing is about this movie, and we'll get into it when we get into the synopsis. And I think we talked about this movie quite significantly before recording in our chat, which we very rarely do. And I think I said at some point, there is no motherfucking studio in existence that would have allowed this film to be released as like a big budget picture, unless the last couple movies in the series were gigantic films, and even then they would have micromanaged Tom Laughlin to hell. So I'm surprised this even got released, because this is a fucking bizarre film.
And the thing is, too, you might think when you look at the Billy Jack franchise, and this is the whole franchise, but this film you really see it, you would think like, oh, he made these very crowd-pleasing action movies, and then he kind of low-key smuggled his politics into it. But that's wrong. I know we've talked about it before, but that's what it seems like when you read about what these movies are. That's not it. There's no action in any of these movies. He doesn't like launder his like progressive politics through the crowd-pleasing kind of populist thing in this movie that brings in the crowd. It is the politics, because it's so feel-good. It's so like fucking angsty boomer middle finger to the man. That's what brings in like the normies. There's no action to speak of.
It is very bizarre, because usually it's the exact opposite in pretty much every movie.
In almost every movie we talk about to some degree.
Oh man, yeah. No, let's get into some details quick, because I really want to get into synopsis and themes here. So once again, this is The Trial of Billy Jack. It was released in 1974. It was rated PG. It was
back when that meant something.
Yeah, back when that meant something, exactly. It was once again directed by Tom Laughlin, who directed the other two movies. And this time he didn't go by a pseudonym, so impressed, because he always went by a pseudonym beforehand.
I think I might have mentioned this before. I wonder if he had the pseudonyms because he didn't want people to know that he was making it all himself. Maybe he thought that made him seem unserious.
I think so, too. I think when Billy Jack came out, and obviously I think we mentioned it on the Billy Jack episode, it's one of the most successful independent films of all time, coming off the coattails of his previous movie that was also one of the most successful independent films of all time. Exactly.
Yeah, game changers in Hollywood.
2 game changers in a row, and now he's coming back for a third time. So now he's proven himself as a creative mind. And they're like, fuck it, I don't have to do a pseudonym anymore. I'm fucking Tom Laughlin. Here's my
he's an auteur.
And this film was written by Tom Laughlin and Dolores Taylor, who Dolores Taylor is his wife. But this time, they were under the pseudonyms of Frank Christina and Teresa Christina, that were also, I believe, Tom Laughlin and Dolores Taylor's pseudonyms on, I believe, Born Losers, but I could be wrong about that. You know what? I think it was actually a Billy Jack, because I think on Born Losers, it was T.C. Frank. That was
I don't think Dolores Claiborne was very involved in Born Losers. I think she really comes on as like a creative hand, I think, on Billy Jack.
I looked it up, and she was only in Born Losers as a cameo. That's it. She was not involved in as intimately with the production as she was with the later Billy Jack films.
Whereas on all of the films going forward, she's, of course, has a recurring character. I think she really helped develop that character and co-wrote a lot of them with Laughlin, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe so, yes. And this movie was produced by a gentleman named Joe Kramer. Now, I just wanted to add his name here, but I looked him up on IMDb. He has literally no other credits to his name, and he doesn't even have a Wikipedia article. So who the fuck is Joe Kramer? It could be anybody.
Is another Laughlin pseudonym? Maybe
I don't know. It didn't say that it was, because he usually says that on the trivia. So I'm kind of surprised it wasn't said.
Well, now I'm just wondering if it, like, let's say an explicitly political movie came in with a shadowy producer, and right now, wouldn't you immediately be doing a mad dash to figure out who that was, to figure out whose pockets were funding this?
I believe it was George Oros. George Soros? Yeah, George Soros.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's produced every movie, every Hollywood film for the last 40 years, 30 years. That's why they're all so good.
Exactly. And just like the last Billy Jack movies we've talked about, Tom Laughlin is most known for the Billy Jack movies and the Return of Billy Jack, which of course was never released, but I'm sure we'll get to it someday, or at least talk about it.
So I'm still looking. He did release some footage that he had made for that film, but I think it's gone now. I think it's totally scrubbed.
And as well, he was in the movies The Master Gunfighter, as well as other small productions as a bit actor. That's how he got his start in Hollywood. And Dolores Taylor, who was Tom Laughlin's wife, of course, was really only in the Billy Jack movies. She doesn't have any other credits besides the Billy Jack movies. I believe we've mentioned that in other episodes, but just wanted to reiterate that. Now, here's the part that makes the trial of Billy Jack kind of a trial in itself. This movie is 173 minutes long, which is literally over an hour longer than both Born Losers and Billy Jack.
Yes.
It is 61 and 62 minutes longer than both those movies.
Yes, it is a 3-hour film, and we're going to get there. It doesn't really have, it has a very lighter plot than the previous two movies in some ways.
I agree with that, especially of Billy Jack.
Sort of a series of vignettes, kind of, about the characters. And it's also insane. I just want to, so much shit happens in this movie. And I love these movies. This is not irony. It's not a joke. I think they are deeply admirable. I think they're fun movies. I think he created a really compelling character. I think there's some really nice stuff, and especially for the times they came out, lots to chew on here, kind of socially. But boy, I mean, there are a few moments where this film goes off the rails. And there's some subtext in this film that I find pretty frustrating. We've talked in the past about the pacifist kind of left liberal politics of these movies. And in the previous movies, it feels pretty well intentioned, hard for me to get mad about. It gets a little nasty at points in this movie, a little condescending.
Yes, I believe actually, Brian, while you were saying pacifism, I rolled my eyes.
I mean, yeah, you may as well have.
Yeah. And then talking about how impactful these movies are. So this movie had a budget of $2.5 million, which was, I believe, the highest budgeted Billy Jack movie, which is still crazy because $2.5 million in 1974 was still a pretty good, like, budgeted movie, but still not a giant budget film, probably like a mid-budget film from that era.
And they try to do so much in this film. Like, and I'm not saying it all looks great, but you literally see every dollar on screen. And I don't necessarily mean that in a good way. Yeah,
that's for sure. In this movie, so there is a little bit of controversy on how much this movie grossed. So I found estimates anywhere between $50 to $89 million. I was not able to find a definitive box office gross for this film. Other websites said 89, other websites said $50 million. Either way, this movie was a gigantic hit at the box office. And this movie also grossed $6.7 million in rentals. Now, unlike the previous Billy Jack movies, Born Losers and Billy Jack once again. This movie did very, very poorly at the international box office. And Tom Laughlin has a theory for that. So his theory was essentially because this movie was very critical, The Trial of Billy Jack, and to be fair, all the Billy Jack movies are to a certain extent, of militarism, of war crimes, of police brutality, that the government colluded to basically stop The Trial of Billy Jack from being a success internationally. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that's a bit of a stretch. Because, obviously, Born Losers and Billy Jack were successful in the international box office, and those movies are pretty much just as critical of these things.
I mean, I think he might be, I don't think he's being disingenuous. I mean, this movie is much more than the first two movies, very specific to things that are happening in America.
Here we are. So I found the actual source of the quote. It said, its international take was very small. Laughlin suggested that American government agencies conspired to force the film to be banned in almost every country in the world to hide its scorching exposés from foreign audiences. Although he admitted he has no evidence. So I thought that was pretty
funny. I have some thoughts on this. This is really interesting. There is some pretty explicit, not pretty. There's explicit stuff about the My Lai massacre.
Oh, very much so, yes.
There's some pretty explicit stuff about local governments and corporations pushing Native Americans out of out of their land, basically
and committing violence against them and doing actual genocide against them too.
And particularly the My Lai stuff. Sure, I'm not saying that couldn't have happened, but my other take on that is that the things he's talking about in this movie, much more than in Billy Jack or especially in Born Losers, are very particular to America. So it's more like, is there much of an international reference point for some of this? One of the main conflicts of the film is the whole that Native Americans being kind of corporations attempting to buy and then force them off their land. For some countries, there just may not be an immediate reference point for that, I guess.
True, too. And also, the portrayal, and we will get to that in the synopsis because I do want to talk about it a lot, but the My Lai reenactment, essentially a My Lai reenactment, although in the movie it's claimed it was 7 months prior to My Lai. Now, the thing is, though, is that in 1974, when this movie came out, the idea that the people who did the My Lai massacre, who perpetrated it, like Lieutenant Calley and all that, the idea of them getting prosecuted was incredibly controversial in America. Like, it was a contentious issue on whether or not the people involved in that massacre should have ever been prosecuted in the first place. And to this day, Lieutenant Calley is still a convicted war criminal. He never got his convictions overturned. I mean, he shouldn't. But you know what I'm saying? That was an incredibly controversial thing to do at the time. In fact, the helicopter gunner who actually shot at the troops who were killing people in My Lai actually got death threats afterwards. A guy who was responsible for stopping a massacre got death threats from 1960s, 70s versions of Chuds. It's just crazy. And Tom Laughlin portraying that in his movie as a distinct negative. And this was probably one of the first anti-Vietnam statements in a major motion picture. In fact, when this movie came out, technically the Vietnam War was still occurring. I mean, America technically got their forces out in 1973, but South Vietnam and North Vietnam were still fighting in 1974. So this was still very fresh in Americans' memories.
Ongoing, yes.
It's very brave of him to include that in his movie as an extremely negative thing. And also, by the way, showing a portrayal of villagers getting mowed down, including children. That takes
babies and women. And that's basically the opening scene of the movie. Not exactly the opening scene. It is in the very beginning of the movie.
I mean, chronologically it is.
And again, he does portray it as an incident that the audience can read as bad. And I don't even know if I think now that that's the case in America. I mean, more than it was then. But, I mean, the right-wing kind of take on My Lai would pretty much have to be, I guess unless you're a rare type of libertarian, well, they were in war and that's what you do to win wars. That was the general consensus then. And probably for a lot of people, that's what the default position is now for a lot of pretty bad people.
Oh, agreed. Yeah, I would say that, and obviously not doing a poll, but I would say of Americans who know what the My Lai massacre is, I would say it's pretty heavily against it. But once again, back in the 70s, it was a solid 50-50 on whether you believe that My Lai was justified or not. It was an incredibly contentious issue.
And it's portrayed, or, the fictionalized version of this one is portrayed pretty graphically. He's going out of his way to make sure that you see kind of what he's saying, and so he's going hey, this happened.
Like, yeah, and they exclusively say women, children, and babies were put into a pit, murdered in this movie, and then one child is running away, gets shot while he's running away. I mean, like, it's pretty, especially for 1974, it's about as graphic as you could, especially for a PG movie, it's about as graphic as you can get. So, once again, Tom Laughlin, I know, rest in peace. You had the balls. You gotta respect base libs. You gotta respect base libs.
No, I love Tom Laughlin. We're gonna get into, of course, he did, the red face thing, which is symptomatic of his times. I don't think he would do it now.
Well, to be fair, he also blew himself.
He did blew himself. That's so weird. What a weird choice that was.
It was. Speaking of people's thoughts, so this movie has a 44% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes and a 48% audience score, so very divided among critics and audiences. And I can see why. This movie is incredibly partisan. It is also far longer, and I would argue probably less crowd-pleasing than Billy Jack by quite a bit, unless you agree with the politics, and it's extremely crowd-pleasing.
Yeah, exactly. This movie, for its length, I tried to do kind of a mental tally of the actual fighting in this film. I think there is significantly less than either of the previous two movies per minute.
There is. However, I will say, once we get to those scenes, the action scenes in this movie are pretty fucking good. I actually liked them quite a bit.
They're always pretty good. I mean, they're pretty well choreographed. I mean, there's some pretty obvious stunt double work, But...
Oh, yeah, for sure. All right, let's get into some trivia here. So I have a couple of facts. There weren't nearly as many as there were in Billy Jack and Born Losers, but I found some good trivia here, I think. The first trivia fact I have here is the Indian Rights Symposium in the film was unscripted. The testimonials delivered were written by the actual speakers and actors. I thought that was pretty cool. As we always say about Tom Laughlin, he, for better or worse, he loves getting the B actors their screen time. He's a very egalitarian filmmaker.
I think it's great. Maybe it's not always the best thing to just put on screen in retrospect, but if you're making a movie and you want that movie and its method and its process to like reflect your politics, I mean, I would say he did a pretty good job of that most of the time.
Agreed, 100%. And the next fact I have here, and I believe this is one we mentioned pretty early on in the writing and review process for this episode, but this film is arguably the first blockbuster. The first film to be launched in a wide release in the modern fashion, debuting simultaneously at over 1,000 theaters and booked by the filmmakers on a 4-wall basis, renting the theaters and controlling the box office receipts. And this was, like I said, probably the very first blockbuster. This was even before Jaws, which I think a lot of people nowadays consider to be kind of like the first modern blockbuster.
Well, like, this is arguably the first blockbuster, but if it's not this, it's Jaws. I mean, Jaws is like the one you can't argue with, I guess.
I agree, yeah. It's no later than Jaws, 100%. But yeah, I think it's really cool that this is arguably the first blockbuster film. I mean, we talk about how influential Tom Laughlin is. Here's another way he's fucking influential.
That's, I guess, one of the things that's so interesting about these movies is that they really, and part of that's because they are exploitation films. They had an exploitative market. And I don't necessarily mean that derogatorily or that they're offensive. I mean that they're exploiting popular trends. He's exploiting in the first in Born Losers, the motorcycle film craze. He's, and again, not necessarily cynically, but he's exploiting kind of like hippie culture. He's exploiting, political angst, economic angst at the time, Nixon era shit, and the martial arts craze, and that's all in the marketing campaign. But there's something that's interesting to me that people really responded to these explicitly kind of left-leaning, idealistic, kind of like very serious, I'm just saying there are preachy movies, but they got a really big crowd of all kinds of people in. And you think now, like looking back at least, they seem almost radical at times. So it's just funny to me that I guess studios pretend like they can't make movies like that. Like, the line from a lot of filmmakers, I think, tends to be, well, we'd like to make our movies more like that, or a lot of artists in general, but we can't because people won't like it. But clearly at one time there was like a big audience for stuff like that.
Oh, no, for sure. I mean, even for like a more mainstream example, and people obviously have never seen it this way, but, Star Wars, for example, like the Rebel Alliance were based on the Viet Cong. Fucking George Lucas said that himself.
Yeah, well, or like, and again, this is similar to the Star Wars thing. It's maybe a little bit more like subterfuge. In T2, the T-1000 is deliberately an LAPD officer.
Yes, very true,
now,
too.
Those are things that obviously they're easier to ignore or not notice than the Billy Jack stuff. But I think that's interesting is that there's a contingency of people in media and just people you meet who pretend like most people don't want to hear politics. Most people just want something that's nice and middle of the road and, that doesn't make them have to think about these things. But I feel like when you look back at pop culture or, at various different points, you get huge numbers of people responding to things that are explicitly saying like, hey, this shit's happening and it's fucked up and it's happening to you or to people like you.
Yeah, I think people like politics in their pop culture, but it's one of those things where I don't think it's always like matriculating into actual action. For example, Rage Against the Machine were an incredibly popular rock band, but I think most people are just like, all right, well, I like the song about the Zapatistas or about Leonard Peltier, but like, what am I supposed to do about it, essentially? Or like, they may have not even processed exactly what exactly was the action item there. Like,
yeah. Like, what do you even do with something? I guess, like, De La Rocha said pretty explicitly that he gave up mostly on music because of the failure of Rage Against the Machine to materialize into, action. And part of it, I guess, is like, what do you expect, I guess, when you give someone, and I think this is a similar case with the Billy Jack movies, when you give someone such an explicit piece of, like, hey, this is what this is about, I wonder, like, what are they supposed to take from that as, what actions are they supposed to be inspired to take, In Billy Jack, I have to say, I think that it's pretty much to vote for, like, a left liberal candidate. I hate to say it.
I mean,
I love Tom Laughlin. I love him, but
he was a based liberal, and he was strong on both the based and the liberal part. That's the way
I can't remember if you said it or I said it when we were messaging back and forth about there's a debate scene that we'll get to when we get there. And one of us said, oh, well, a based lib is still a lib, because I don't really see. I mean, he pretty much condemns like militant leftism in this movie.
Essentially, yeah. I mean, there's specific lines of dialogue where he's like, oh, these idealistic, dumb kids. The way to really do it is to change people's hearts and minds through debate. Like, all right, sure, whatever. He is a liberal. Yeah. He's a based liberal, but he's still at the end of the day.
He's a liberal who had like guts to say what he wanted to say. He didn't feel like he had to be friends with, Republicans, which they all do now. But he would have voted. He might have been a Bernie guy. I'd have to think he would have been a Warren guy first.
Well, I'm pretty sure he was he was like partially behind the George McGovern campaign, which was like a proto Bernie Sanders campaign.
Yeah.
So that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm sure Laughlin was a McGovern guy. That makes so much sense. But sometimes I think about how like Jello Biafra was like a Warren guy, and that bums me out.
And then speaking of politics, this film was made as a direct response to the 1970 Kent State Massacre, when National Guardsmen fired on a crowd of protesting students, killing 4 of them. Now, I think he made it as a direct response because he just really hates Devo and he didn't want them to form.
I was just going to say that. He was like, oh my God, I have to listen to this shitty, weird music by these nerds now.
Anybody who doesn't understand the reference, which one was it? Casal, right? That was it?
Yeah.
That was the guy who was friends with 2 of the Kent State shooting victims.
Yeah.
He was, of course, he's in Devo in a couple years after Kent State Devo was formed. But yeah, I'm glad you had that reference in the back of your head too.
Everyone always remember Devo directly formed because of Kent State, because one of the founding members saw his friends get fucking murdered there. And when you think of them as the funny little band that did the Whip It song,
just think of murdered students.
Yeah, that's why that band exists.
Just like MCR exists because of 9/11.
Oh my God. That's nice. And I believe they're being earnest when they say that, but that's a little silly.
Well, that's the thing, is that the whole story is that Gerard Way was driving to his first day at work at Cartoon Network, and on the way, he saw the towers get hit, and he changed his mind on working in animation and wanted to start a band.
So he left. That's okay. I'm just going to say, and I know animation is a hard job. It is like most animators are like going and doing a job. They're not animating, they're doing things. But he kind of left one dream job for another one,
Oh,
like,
no, for sure, 100%.
Fuck you, man.
Yeah. Oh, shit. And the last fact I have here, and like I said, very light on facts for this movie, unfortunately, so I tried to include all the ones that I thought would at least be fairly interesting, but this film was included in the book, The 50 Worst Films of All Time, by Harry Medved and Randy Lowell, which, by the way, yeah, bullshit. I agree. There are so many worse movies than this. There's so many worse. And, okay, I'm just looking at the films listed on here, and one of them, no bullshit, one of the films listed on here is The Omen.
Fuck these guys. These guys fucking losers.
The Omen. Get the fuck out of here.
Like, and I don't like love The Omen the way like some people do, but like, yeah, get the fuck out of here.
It's definitely not even close to the worst movie of all time. It's not even the worst movie released that month of 1976.
50 of the top 50. I just like, okay, there's a lot to make fun of about Laughlin. In fact, sometimes I worry that we go a little easy on him because he seems like a cool guy, to be honest. But if you're saying this movie's that bad, it's because you're mad that he's trying to say something he believes in. That's 100%. I really think that. If you watch this movie and you're like, this is the worst fucking thing, it's because, and it is corny. He's a corny guy. But if you think it's that bad, it's because you don't like what he's saying, or worse yet, you just don't like that he is saying something.
Yeah, I'm fucking mad.
Or you maybe don't like the red face, I guess. That's valid.
But really, though, The Omen? Get the fuck out of here. That is a horrible choice.
Like, well, that's objectively like a really beautifully shot and edited tense movie. And The Omen's one of those movies, kind of like The Exorcist. Like, I don't like personally have a really strong response to it, but it's a good movie.
Yeah, for sure. God, what a fucking disaster. And then speaking of things that aren't disasters, though, let's get into the synopsis. So the synopsis is fairly light because, once again, you're right. It's a lot of vignettes. It's not really a lot of plot, but there's a lot of things to talk about in the plot. So if you have anything you want to mention that I didn't go in the synopsis, we'll just keep going. But the opening of this film has credits playing over footage of Monument Valley. And I thought it was really cool for Tom Laughlin to have inspiration for this opening. You know, he's a big fan of Metallica. He loves the song I Disappear, the music video specifically. And he's like, I want to have that shooting location in my movie. So he chose Monument Valley to play over the credits here. And also on text on the screen, there's other college massacres during the Vietnam era, as well as the Freedom School listed at the end. And you're like, wait, what?
I was on the fence about if I thought that was okay or not for him to include the Freedom School in that list. Like, the actual including of the movie begins and ends with reminders that the types of violence portrayed that the government and that bigots in this movie commit are real, that they're happening all the time in America and abroad, which I'm fine with. That they book in the film. I kind of think maybe he shouldn't have included the Freedom School in that list.
It's a little self-important, I'll just say that.
Well, like, maybe he just has the list of the real ones, and then he lets you see the fictional movie. And then, you know, the audience can piece together that it's a fictionalized comparison to those real events.
Yeah, very much so. So Gene, once again played by the actress Dolores Taylor, Tom Laughlin's wife, is narrating the story while in the hospital. Billy Jack goes to court facing an involuntary manslaughter charge stemming from events in the earlier film where he murders Posner's son while he's raping a 13-year-old. Once again, that actually happened.
Direct sequel.
During the court scenes, Gene is cross-examined on the stand and blah, blah, blah. A lot of facts go there. Then Billy Jack details, once again played by Tom Laughlin, details during the trial how he witnessed a massacre during his time in Vietnam. And was
Objection, relevance.
Yeah.
That's what you'd hear.
And was brought up on charges of cowardice for not engaging in the massacre. He is eventually found guilty of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to a prison term, although they do not say how long his prison term actually is. And it's not very clear in the movie how long it is. It's not for a super long time, maybe like 4 or 5 years or something like that.
I think it must be about in the real time between the movies, because you see the kids from the past films and he's like, oh, you're big now.
So like 3 years.
Yeah.
He gets 3 years for murdering a child rapist. That's actually not that bad of a sentence if you think about it. I mean,
for 73, 72, whenever that would have happened.
Yeah.
For a non-white guy, quote unquote.
Yeah, exactly. Meanwhile, the kids at the Freedom School, an experimental school for runaways and troubled youth on a Native American reservation in Arizona, that was partially inspired by Tom Laughlin's actual school. They vowed to rebuild the school after the events of the last film. They raise funds and acquire a new building, eventually starting their own newspaper and television station. Inspired by Nader's Raiders, which I believe, is that like Nader, like the presidential candidate Nader? Although I don't know that. They began using the newspaper and TV station to conduct investigative reporting, angering several politicians and townspeople in the process with their exposés.
And like, what kind of journalism? I mean, these are like kids. Like
these are children, yeah.
Like, what the fuck? I mean, like, good for them, but it's like, I don't know.
It is a little goofy, I'll just say that.
We're gonna blow the lid off this. Like,
yeah.
No, if that actually happened at some experimental, a bunch of 14-year-olds were like, we're gonna blow the lid off of this company that's dumping toxic waste on the reservation, they would just ignore them. The kids are like, oh, they're gonna sue us into oblivion. Like, no, they would just ignore you.
I mean, to be fair, one of the most successful union drives of the early 20th century was organized by like literal 10-year-olds.
Well, now you made me feel bad.
Yeah, look up the Newsies strike of the early 20th century. That was organized by like a literal 12-year-old.
That's cool as shit, though.
Also, one of the most famous union leaders in India was like a 14-year-old boy, and the companies murdered him in broad daylight when he was like 15. But that's neither here nor there. Either way, children can get involved in things.
Well, you in Wisconsin, where you're at, there'll be a lot of children involved in things pretty soon.
Yeah, the state's falling apart. You know, that's the thing. Wisconsin's motto is forward. I didn't realize it was forward into the apocalypse. I didn't realize that was the state's motto now.
Instead of an asbestos canary, you're going to have like an asbestos 6-year-old in a little cage that goes down there with the miners.
Yeah. Oh, man. The state's great. The school's activities range from having their own search and rescue team to artistic endeavors such as a marching band and belly dancing.
And sports, which they call yoga athletics.
The school hosts a large marching band contest and arts festival called 1984 is Closer Than You Think to raise money for the school.
That was back when it was a leftist thing to invoke 1984.
The school begins to hold hearings on the rights of the Native people and child abuse. The school defies a court order to return a boy to his father who had abused the boy and cut off his hand. You heard that right, audience. There is a child in this movie who is being taught at the Freedom School whose dad literally cut off his hand, and there is a plot point on whether or not the courts will decide to give this child back to their father. That is insane!
Everything about it's insane. Okay, I love Tom Laughlin. We were talking about this in our messages. He was reading about child abuse, about the psychology of it, and like statistics on it, and he was like, I gotta let people know about this child abuse stuff. Put it in the movie.
Like, listen, I understand the 70s were a different time, but there is no motherfucking way that a parent who literally dismembered a child on purpose would ever get their child back. Chopped his hand off. And they show it.
They show the handless child.
Crazy.
The Freedom School is basically like a Weimar school.
Oh my God, just fucking crazy.
And this child abuse thing, like it's one thread of many, but it is throughout the movie. It is a constant theme. We don't get away from it.
Yeah, the child abuse thing in this movie is absolutely ridiculous. Like, if you wanted to show an actual severe child abuse case, you know, we could have used an example of like Genie. Brian, are you familiar with Genie, the feral child?
Yes.
So something like that, or, you know, a very recent example of a genie that happened just a week ago, just down the street from me. And Brian, I believe I linked this article to you earlier, correct?
You did.
So I'm going to link it in the episode description because I usually don't link anything beyond our socials in there, but I want people to read this because this is an extreme example of child abuse, obviously, but it is a actual real life example of child abuse.
It bummed me out.
Yeah, of these two parents, one biological mother and a stepfather who like ritualistically pretty much abused two children, one 7 and one 9-year-old, to the point where these children didn't have any social skills. They had never been to school. They had never been to the doctor. And in fact, also didn't even have potty training abilities. Like, that is literally the level of child abuse going on here.
In the article you sent me, either the initial call by a young girl in the neighborhood, so they escaped. A window got broken and they went out through the window of their house. One of the calls to police or to someone concerned who saw them roaming around the neighborhood, by the way, nude and I think like kind of caked in feces.
Yep, caked in feces, yep.
Described them as looking like cavemen and acting like they had never seen the sun before.
It's horrifying stuff. You want to know what's even more wild, Brian? I looked up the address on Google Maps. I also drove by the house just to see. The lights were still on in the house, which is even more eerie, if you ask me.
Yeah.
That was literally on the exact same street we used to live on.
Oh.
Yep, that was the exact same street we used to live on. Now, not obviously the same part of the street, but it was on the same street we used to live on.
Well, you know, what I always liked about living in West Dallas, and I would stand by this, is that people mind their own business.
That they did.
And clearly people minded their own business for a very long time when they were neighbors with Okay, can I just say something? But this whole article pissed me off. First of all, maybe not feel so bad for the one-hand kid in Billy Jack.
Yeah.
Got off easy. And he's being rude to people. He's throwing things at people. They're giving him hugs and he's slapping teddy bears out of their hands. No, here's a real thing. This actual thing. The stepfather of these horribly abused children who are just caked in shit, can't function, seems like they can't really speak even as far as, you know, real genie type situation. Said to authorities that this is the stepfather. I knew the way the kids were being treated was wrong, but their mom would get so mad and argue, and so I had to, quote, pick my battles. Motherfucker, if you see a 7 and 9-year-old caked in shit, like hunched over like cavemen. Maybe you pick that battle, you fucking pussy.
Yeah, agreed.
That more than any other thing, that made me mad.
It's just,
You had to pick your
yeah.
battle.
And also the mom was just like, I know I fucked up, but I was just like, I don't know what to do. And it's like, I don't know, maybe not let your kids live in literal filth.
It's almost like she was talking about it. Like, because, sometimes parents fuck up and CPS takes kids away. That is a thing that happens. That's not super uncommon. And sometimes parents need to go through a process of, and that's the type of things they'll say. And she, like, it's almost like, I remember reading that thinking, do these parents not comprehend that this is like beyond normal child neglect? Because that's how they were talking about it. Well, I gotta pick my battles. And the mom's like, oh, yeah, I know my boys deserve better. It's like, no, you're bad people.
Yeah, you're a bad people. I mean, there's a reason why they're facing 40 years in prison. They're bad people. They're bad fucking people. So, but yeah, I didn't want to bring that one up because that's like an example of like obviously extreme child abuse, but that would be more realistic than what happened in this movie with this handless child.
Well, and the thing too is, this is one of the things that frustrates me about this movie. And this is throughout the Billy Jack series. We talked about it in the last ones. There's this insistence that pacifism is ultimately the best thing. Even though Billy Jack does this Aikido and it's really cool and it looks cool and he likes doing it, clearly it makes him feel like a big man, which is cool to watch. The message of the movies is always that he needs to stop doing that. Now, I find that very frustrating, both because we now know, I think, even better than we did in the 70s. That's not how, like, politics works. That's not how, like, wielding power against, like, fascists and racists works. But also, one of the points where that's driven home is that the school are kind of saying that even just unconditional love and support can even make this parent-child situation where this guy chopped off this boy's hand can even repair that. And it's like, well, no, this guy shouldn't have his kid because he chopped off his hand. He should probably get his ass kicked.
Yeah, he should probably be in prison for the rest of his life. Like, let's be honest here. Like, there is no rehabilitating somebody who dismembers somebody in rage.
Even if there is, I don't want to say there's no rehabilitating, but guess what? They still shouldn't get that kid ever again.
At the very bare minimum, they should never.
I am not going to commit to there's no rehabilitation, but guess what? You don't get to have kids then. You kind of blew it.
You blew that opportunity. You got a big F on that one.
Yeah, you really only get one chance, which is about the worst thing you could do. And what I would like with the Billy Jack movies, and I think we've talked about this before, and we've talked about this privately between ourselves, Taylor. The central emotional conflict seems to be that Billy Jack wants to be a pacifist, but he can't bring himself to. He's not quite strong enough and he's not quite at peace. Now, that's an interesting conflict, but these movies basically say eventually Billy Jack just needs to stop being violent. That's the only way that he'll win. I think that is wrong, just in the real world. I think that's wrong a lot of the time. Especially when you're defending yourself. I also think it's less interesting. What if the conflict was more like, boy, I'd like to be a pacifist. I believe in peace and I believe in love and I want to believe all of these things that my girlfriend and the school are teaching. I want these kids to grow up with those values. But also, when I look around, I just don't see it working. Wouldn't that be a more interesting conflict?
I agree 100%. Because, the thing is that this world is bigoted, specifically the world in this movie, although this world is obviously too in real life. But the world in this movie is bigoted, it's violent, it's not accepting, it's intolerant. And Billy Jack doesn't want to be violent, but he has to be. But the whole thing is that, like, a truly brave thing would be Billy Jack is just kicking ass all the time to stop these pieces of shit instead of just kind of waffling on, well, I don't necessarily want to, but if I have to take off my shoes and do a Hapkido kick on cops, I guess I have to. It's like, no. In this movie, like, it's literally kill or be killed. Like, I'm sorry.
Actually, in the world that Tom Laughlin has created, it is almost the moral imperative to be violent. And he sort of recognizes that because that's also how you get all the cool fucking kickboxing scenes, right? But ultimately, the message that Laughlin and Claiborne want you to take from these movies is you should stop being violent eventually. You should be totally peaceful. But, like, they've created a world where that's not possible, where everyone is trying to kill them, literally to kill them and to kill the kids under their care.
By the way, I do think it's really funny. You keep calling her Dolores Claiborne. That's a movie.
Yeah, I do. I just heard myself say that's a Stephen King book.
Yeah.
I did. I heard myself say that, and I was like, God damn it.
I thought, to be fair, the first time I thought it was funny, and the second time I'm like, all right, this is a pretty funny joke, but yeah. It's all good. But I thought
this time I heard myself do it, and I was like, fuck.
Yeah. But yes, let's get back to the plot here real quick. So Billy Jack is released from prison and trying to reconnect with his spiritual beliefs. He begins a series of lengthy vision quests. And oh boy, we'll get to the vision quest in just a moment. He becomes involved with a radical group on the reservation that opposes the federal effort to cease recognition of their tribe and the surrender of their tribal lands to local developers. When one of the tribal members is arrested for poaching deer on what was formerly tribal land, but now owned by Posner, the school comes to his defense. We almost get a Billy Jack fight scene at some point, but it never happens. I actually really do like that one. These kids are getting harassed. They're getting searched without any probable cause, and also one of the cops is groping a teenage girl.
Yeah.
So very classy small town cops. By the way, Brian, I know you grew up in a small town. This is very unrealistic. Small town cops don't do that kind of stuff. You know that.
I don't know. So
I'm fucking around, obviously.
Yeah, since we're here, I mean, there is a cop in Southern Wisconsin who all of the high schoolers knew was a big, like, pervert who would try to get high school girls to go into his squad car. Now, that was like an open secret around town.
By the way, if you're ever interested in seeing a pedo cop get destroyed, watch the YouTube video the moment a cop realizes he's going to jail for being a pedo. That's a great video.
That's so good, because that guy is such a fucking preppy yuppie, and he thinks he's so smart. He thinks he's, like, outsmarting the woman that's interrogating him so bad.
Yeah, it's a great fucking video. I'd really recommend that one. And also, there's a dreading video on it, too. Yeah, his name was Jalen Fleer. That's his name. And, well, I won't say what I think should happen to him, but let's just say I hope he doesn't have a very good time in prison. I'll just say that.
And, he's a cop, so probably not.
Yeah, a cop pedo? Yeah, that guy's fucked. That guy is fucked.
Fuck him.
Yeah. As tensions between the school and the people in the nearby town, they erupt, I suppose you could say. A mysterious explosion at the school knocks their television station off the air. The governor calls a state of emergency and mobilizes the National Guard, and a curfew is established in town. The students respond by holding a parade in the town in violation of the curfew. On the way back to the school, their bus breaks down and local townspeople confront the students and threaten to set their bus on fire. Now, they threaten to, but they actually do set the bus on fire as well. Yeah. And we actually get the very first Billy Jack action scene.
And this is 2 hours in. There's other things that happen, but we're really going, because we're going to talk more about the themes. But this is 2 hours into the film about.
Yes. It is. I think it's almost exactly 2 hours on the dot.
Yeah, it is.
But it's a pretty solid action scene. It's a really good warm-up for the climactic action scene that happens slightly later. But once again, Billy Jack just Hapkido kicks everybody, just fucking annihilates a bunch of bigoted rednecks. We gotta love it.
Yeah, no, it's always cool to watch. I mean, I'm going to say Laughlin knows where the sauce is. He knows eventually you need to give them a little bit of the red meat, because that is ultimately what puts the butts in the seats.
You know what this movie kind of reminds me of? It reminds me of, I think it was the 2013 Godzilla movie, where they tease Godzilla fights throughout the entire movie, and at the very end, there's finally a Godzilla fight. Yeah. But there's no Godzilla fights until that very last scene.
Yeah, it's pretty bogus. So have I told you a little bit, and I think I mentioned it too on the Billy Jack episode, my idea for a potential Billy Jack reboot?
I believe you have.
So I had another thought for it while watching this, which is that if that was made, the philosophy towards fight scenes should be kind of that it's like edging. You get closer and closer and closer to a fight scene, and then you back off and you let the tension build, kind of like these movies do, but it's a little more deliberate. And then when there is a fight scene, instead of being over in a couple minutes, like the fight scenes are in here, it's like really intense. Like when you're edging, it's like really hard and just really messy. And then, there's not another fight scene for another hour and a half or whatever.
And, speaking of things that made me bust and have a lot of fluids, just go everywhere. I want to talk about, and I think we talked about it quite a bit already earlier and in the chat. We got to talk about this ritual that he does in the cave. So Billy Jack, on the guidance of his grandfather, who looks literally nothing like him in the movie too, is very
could not look less like him.
He descends into a cave, and while he's in the cave, he gets possessed by a red demon, and he turns all red. So he's literally wearing red face. So that was very funny.
Well, and let's clear this up. He's on hallucinogens at this point.
He is on like ayahuasca, yeah.
Yeah, he's on ayahuasca or something. That is not stated, but that's what's happening.
Yeah, and he goes in this cave. It's full of bats, snakes, and then a illustrated panther that's like kind of an early special effect comes out at him. And then after that,
that's where that 40 million went.
He also gets confronted by his blue self. This is the scene where he blew himself, as my fans of Arrested Development will get. Yeah. I did think that was really funny. Like, it's just one version of Laughlin on one side is red and the other side is blue, and they're just talking to it. It's very surreal. And then after that, he goes up to the surface and he goes through a bunch of other trials, essentially teaching him pacifism, where he eventually meets Jesus. No, literally, that he literally meets Jesus.
Didn't it seem like a missed opportunity to have when he meets Jesus to not have Jesus all brutalized and on the cross, passion style? Because Jesus just standing there, and then Billy Jack like goes up and like slaps him.
Yeah. And he's like,
and then Jesus is like, "Oh, I pity you for being violent."
It's really funny. He says, like, he also has, like, what's definitely not an American accent. He says, like, an Irish accent or something. Like,
yeah,
like Jesus has an Irish
Jesus. One of the cool things, and I mean this because, like, the red and blue versions of him kind of silly, the Panther kind of silly. One of the things with the, the spirit journey thing, and I know that this is probably not correct. Laughlin probably did not really know what he was doing in here. And I would, if anyone is like a friend of ours or is listening that is native and would like to give us more interest, more kind of perspective on these films, I would absolutely love that.
Hell yeah.
One of the things with that scene that I did like, sincerely, is there's a part where Billy Jack is seeing during this journey visions of kind of like different authoritarian regimes kind of butchering minorities, starting with like the Romans butchering Christians, Christians butchering others during the Crusades, all the way up to the Nazis and Jews, and then finally, America and Vietnam. And I actually thought that was really effective because that's all stuff that's been alluded to. But to have it, to me, the way that I read that scene is kind of like he's seeing it all systemically for the first time, at least. And I thought that was kind of a cool scene.
Agreed. 100%. Yeah, I actually, even though I do think the ritual scene is pretty goofy, I did enjoy it. I thought it was a nice little, feast for the eyes. Because there is, as I mentioned earlier, there's some like pretty good early special effects going on. Like they're very enjoyable, especially when the illustrated panther comes at him. It actually kind of freaked me out because I wasn't expecting. I was like, oh shit! Like
the thing is, I know that to some degree it's intentionally psychedelic, but there's another aspect of it where it's like because of the budget, I think it unintentionally has a sort of weird disorienting quality that kind of works in its favor. It is kind of funny to me that, so the thing is, he's red during this point. I'm pretty sure the idea is just that he's extremely sunburned because he's in the desert, but because he's a white guy pretending to be Native American, really bad call.
Yeah.
Really bad call, because this almost makes it seem like after doing ayahuasca his skin becomes redder after he goes through a spirit journey. Really did not think that one through. And
when we say red, like he's literally painted red. Like they took like house paint and painted him red. Like he is so red. So red.
Yeah, I can't. We are not exaggerating this.
Yeah. Like if you were to touch his skin, like it would like burn your hand. He is just that like physically red. It is hilarious. Like it's just.
Yeah, Taylor said before record that he looks like he's almost like a cartoon devil without horns.
Yeah, exactly. He's also has like facial hair that he doesn't have in like the rest of the movie. So like,
yeah, he how long has he been on that fucking desert mountain? Because he's got like a full beard by the end of it.
Yeah, he's just been tanning for like a month straight. That's why he's so red. His skin is literally going to all like not even just the top layer. Like all of his skin is just gonna peel off. That's how fucking.
Yeah, just like a full bodysuit of dead skin that he's gonna step out of.
Yeah, like a snake. Yeah.
Oh.
God damn. All right. And then later on throughout the movie, Billy Jack comes to the attempted rescue of a tribal member who is kidnapped, harassed, and eventually beaten to death at a local dance. Now, I thought it was interesting that Tom Laughlin, because he's done this in both Billy Jack and this movie, where he shows what's essentially a lynching, but obviously without the noose, of Native people. I think it's interesting because when people think of lynchings in America, they oftentimes think of the South. They think of, black people, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to get into all the details. Horrid shit. Actually, interestingly enough, another Milwaukee connection, the only known survivor, black survivor of a lynching, actually moved to Milwaukee after his escape from a lynching, and he started the National Lynching Museum in Milwaukee. Interesting fun fact. I've never been there, but it closed down for a while, but it finally opened back up just a little while ago.
Did it
But
close down due to COVID, or is it something else?
it closed down due to lack of funding and stuff like that. Unfortunately, it was very sad.
That is unfortunate. I'm glad it's open again.
Yeah, 100%. I would like to just obviously check it out and pay my respects of a horrible American institution, post-Civil War American institution. But the one thing I wanted to say about it is that even though the majority of lynchings were of Black people and they mostly happened in the South, although some of them didn't happen in the upper Midwest, very famously, there was a lynching in Duluth. There was also a much forgotten Black lynching in Milwaukee. Actually, the only Black lynching in Wisconsin history that was recorded. But outside of the South, most lynchings were done on Native American people. That's a very forgotten fact in American history. So I thought that was interesting that Tom Laughlin has, I would say, pretty accurately portrayed that in a PG movie. He did a pretty good job of that.
I mean, I kind of do think, and again, if anyone who is Native or like is an expert in that field would like to come on and it seems like he did try to a certain degree to, like, I don't think he was himself trying to steal like valor, quote unquote.
I don't think so either.
He saw himself as an actor who had developed a character to, elucidate the plight of these people. And there's issues with that. There's like white savior shit about that, obviously. But it does seem like he tried really hard. Like he really did, I think, want to, like, this was a thing that he had grown up, and I think so had his wife, around Native Americans, and really thought like there should be a movie about kind of what's happening to these people. I think that's coming from a sincere place.
Agreed. And I also wanted to mention too is that the new Martin Scorsese movie is essentially about a Native American like lynching thing that
I want to see that.
So yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where obviously the genocide of Native Americans is underrepresented fact of American history. But, it, especially in the 70s, that was the last time where it happened still on a grand scale. So Tom Laughlin, good on you for showing how horrifying it is. Like, legitimately. It's, as we said earlier about My Lai, like, Tom Laughlin does not pull punches in this movie. Like, he is willing to show some pretty fucking horrible shit, especially for a PG movie. And especially for like a big box office movie. Like, he put his nuts on the table and said, look at this. Look at this.
And again, like, that is why he made these movies. I do think the reason he didn't do much else beyond Billy Jack is because that's what he cared about. I mean, I clearly loved acting. He loved film. He was a creative guy. I think he loved the Billy Jack character, but it was like an outlet for his social activism, for better or worse. So I don't think that he was using these subjects as like gristle for his content. I think it was the other way around, that film and acting were sort of the medium that he knew that he could do to some degree. And that's what he was going to use.
No, exactly. And then also, we're talking about action scenes. So after this young Native American man is killed and like what I said is essentially a lynching, that's when Tom Laughlin, Billy Jack, of course, and his Hapkido trainer, they fight Posner and his redneck friends. And this action scene slaps. I love it.
It's so satisfying. It's always cool to watch. Billy Jack is a cool character. I mean, whenever there's like a Hapkido scene in a Billy Jack movie, it's a very classic, like, oh, you've got your badass, kind of strong, silent, kind of quippy, like handsome action hero, and he's kicking some racist ass. Pretty well choreographed, not on the level of, again, like an East Asian action film from the same time, but again, for when you compare it to, I think, other action films being made in the US in the early 70s, pretty fucking good. Again, it's not a very long scene. I wouldn't necessarily say that the action scenes when they come in this movie, I wouldn't say that they quite like bust for me. They don't really relieve all that tension that's built up, which is true of most of the Billy Jack movies, but they're good.
Agreed. And then also, I did think it was really funny when Posner is holding up a gun. He's like, we don't have to do this. And then Billy Jack's just like, oh, come on, man. Up until then, it was just a couple broken arms. And they just completely missed the fact that Billy Jack killed his son. Like, let's not forget Billy Jack killed his son. Obviously, I would say pretty justifiably killed his son, but at the same time, killed his son.
Well,
they just completely gloss over that.
The other frustrating thing about all the pacifism shit, and that the ultimate moral is like, oh, Billy Jack is violent because these are bad people, but he would get better results if he wasn't. No, these people are murderers and rapists, and they're going to like destroy this school. They lynched a guy. You trying to like be a pacifist and be like, well, I'm gonna fight you nonviolently is actually kind of irresponsible at this point.
I agree. But then eventually, Billy Jack is just sick of Posner's bullshit, especially after he shoots Master Han, and he kicks Posner in the throat, killing him instantly, which I think is really cool. It was a great little scene.
Yeah, it's great. It's well shot. It's good. I think we've talked about this in previous installments, but I think Laughlin was aware of at least a little bit of Kurosawa and other filmmakers like that and how they film deaths.
Yeah, very much so.
And
I
I
know
think
we mentioned that of his killing of Danny Masterson's character
Danny
in Born
Masterson, yeah.
Losers.
And I do think that he obviously not as sophisticated a filmmaker, not intellectually or technically as sophisticated as Kurosawa or someone like that, but I think he was aware of those techniques. He had studied them and he was trying to kind of do them with what he could.
Agreed.
Or what he had rather.
Totally agree with that. And then eventually Billy Jack is, of course, arrested. He is essentially stopped in the middle of the road, and these redneck cops who arrested him are going to like shoot him and throw him in a ditch, essentially. Like, and also another parallel, that's basically what happened to the Freedom Riders back in the 60s, you know, the famous Mississippi burning case. And he escapes, but he gets shot in the process and he's running away. And the Freedom School students, they're just really pissed. They're obviously just frustrated. All this happens. And the National Guard fire on them, killing, I believe, 3 in the process. I believe that's what's stated at the very beginning of the movie, including the handless boy gets killed, as well as a couple other students. And
do you think he was reunited with his missing hand in heaven?
I hope so. I hope he has the full use of his digits in heaven. I would hope so.
Or maybe it's like crawling around like the thing in the Addams Family.
Or like idle hands.
Yeah, like perching on his shoulder and it's like a pet, like a dog or something.
And also, of course, Jean is very heavily wounded, as what was referenced at the very beginning when she's in the hospital bed narrating the events of the film. And at the very end of the movie, you see Jean is in like physical therapy. She's trying to get well. She eventually goes back to the Freedom School, once again trying to restart it. And Billy Jack also heals from his wounds as they're led through a building. It looks like a church or something as the song plays. There's a lot of like very cheesy songs in this movie. And also, I wanted to highlight the last text of this film. So it says, and I quote, "Some may feel this picture is too violent, but the real massacres which inspired this fictionalized version were 1,000-fold more violent for those innocent people who were its victims. Rather than direct your anger at this recreation, please channel your energy towards those officials who either ordered, condoned, or failed to take action against these events. And perhaps towards ourselves for also turning our backs and letting such events occur unchallenged." And that's the end of the movie. So that is the trial of Billy Jack. Now, before we get on to, and I will spoil, the one Amazon review, and I'll explain why there's only one Amazon review in a little bit. But do we have any final thoughts before we get to our Amazon review?
So one more time, I just want to, I really like this movie. It's crazy. There's actually a lot of other stuff that happens that we kind of ran through because there's a lot happens in this movie. It both doesn't have much linear plot, and it has a lot that happens. For me, because I love these movies, I love them both for their weirdness and I just sincerely think they're cool. I'm never bored watching these movies. But they're, especially watching them now, as opposed to in the 70s when they came out, they're not necessarily going to be super accessible to everyone. My personal biggest issue with this, obviously, I could always have more kickboxing and Aikido fight scenes. I think there could be about 40% more of those in any Billy Jack film. But in this film, the pacifism goes from a nice, idyllic kind of like hippie or post-hippie thing. There's a debate amongst the students about what to do about all of these things that the police are doing. And there's a contingency of the students that say we should bomb the police department. We should bomb the racist stores in town because they're killing us. And then there's other students that are saying, no, we need to be peaceful. We need to win them over that way because violence begets violence. And I don't know if you noticed this, Taylor. 2 of the kids who are most vocally advocating for direct militancy, because again, their peers are being murdered, are a black girl and a Native American guy. And the 2 girls who are preaching to them that they shouldn't be violent, that we are made to sympathize with, are 2 like white girls. I would like to believe that Tom Laughlin was not thinking about that when he did that, and it kind of, I hope so. It left me with a pretty bad taste in my mouth. Also, Laughlin himself says in that coda that you just read that the violence we see on the screen is really what's happening. We watch the National Guard shoot at a school. We watch a recreation of the My Lai massacre. And like he's showing this and telling us that what we're seeing on screen isn't as bad as the real thing. And then he's saying that the best way to combat that is like with love, with persistent love and warmth, and not with direct action. It's just, I don't see where he saw any evidence of that, I guess.
I mean, you know, as we mentioned earlier about the whole base liberal thing, of course, at the end of the day, he is a liberal, no matter how based that he is. But yeah. The thing is, right, is that hatred for oppressive systems and wanting to commit violence against them, to dismantle them, and love for people, those things are not at odds.
No, not at all.
Those things are not like in, as we mentioned, My Lai in Vietnam, right? The Vietnamese nationalists, who hilariously enough, Vietnamese nationalists were the communists. A lot of people, I think, don't understand that nationalism can both be left-wing and right-wing.
Yeah, when it's a colonized nation that's trying to reclaim its national identity.
And they had love for the nation and its people, but they hated the oppressive structures that were stopping unification of their nation and also killing their people. Like, you can both have love and hate for things, and those are not contradictory at all. And I think that's what a lot of liberals just don't understand. It's against their entire, ethos.
They're so obsessed with being consistent with their internal logic, with just, with almost like they're constantly thinking about gotchas. So they're like, well, if I'm violent, then that's gonna, someone's gonna use that against me to advocate for their violence. Like, who gives a shit? If you're right. The thing I guess particularly that frustrates me, because everyone listening to this knows, I like Tom Laughlin. I think he's cool. I think he's a fun writer. I think he made some really neat movies. I think he had a cool style. He's a dumb thing. In the last 3 years or so, kind of during COVID, I started writing short stories, and I consider Tom Laughlin a primary influence for them. Never shown them to anyone. I probably won't. They're not that good. So I like the guy. And I just think he had such an acute awareness of history, of current events, of all of these crimes against humanity going on around him. Could he really, and even he in the movies, he knows that pacifism is, first of all, he knows it's boring. He wouldn't have made his guy a martial arts expert and a badass motorcycle driver if, he would have just made him a Buddhist, but he didn't. So there's that. But also, how can he portrays these things in his own films, and then to say ultimately, but we're just going to keep telling you to just keep loving these people. It just seems...
that's the thing, Brian. Eventually, if we keep voting for George McGovern and Bernie Sanders, everything will just magically get better.
Yeah, I'm going to keep voting for Bernie when he dies in 2 years. I'll keep voting for him.
I'm going to keep voting for fucking RFK Jr. in hopes that things will get better.
I mean, at least that guy seems to have some fucking sack to him. That nut job.
Yeah, what a crank. The perfect definition of a crank. Although, to be fair, I will say, if both my uncle and my father were killed by the CIA, I'd be a crank
you're
too.
That guy. You imagine you're his age when your dad and your uncle are murdered fucking on TV, and and everyone else knows it's by fucking George Bush.
Yeah, George Bush. Exactly.
Then how would you grow up?
Yeah, both my father
and then you have to watch that
were
fucking weasel on TV, and you have to
Exactly.
watch him being interviewed and going, "Are you too nice?"
Both my uncle, who was president, and my father, who would have been president more than likely, were both murdered by a future president.
Yeah, of course that drove him fucking crazy, made him a fucking junkie. Of course it did.
God damn. He's the most functional you could possibly be then, and that's it. I totally was like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense then. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, exactly.
God fucking help us.
I'm gonna vote for RFK Jr. and push him to the left.
Oh man. Yeah, I'm gonna push him to the left too. I'm gonna be like, I think the whole fucking COVID vaccine targeting very specific people, that's wrong. But just make sure it only targets white people. That's what we're that's pushing him to the left.
Man. Would you ever wonder what kind of music he listens to?
Oh God, I bet you anything he probably listens to fucking classic rock. He strikes me as a classic rock.
Yeah, he looks
guy.
Like it. Well, because sometimes I wonder what whenever I watch these movies, I wonder what Tom Laughlin listens to, and I'm like, oh, he listens probably to to Pete Seeger, and then probably because he's not really old enough to be a '60s rock guy, or not young enough to be a '60s rock guy, and then he probably listens to some jazz, right?
I also think he maybe listens to Woody Guthrie. That'd be a possibility too.
That very populist early recorded folk, and then maybe some jazz. I think.
Yeah, or maybe Hank Williams or something like that. Pretty classic 50s acoustic sort of
kind of
populist music.
Sensitive, masculine populist music.
Exactly. All right, let's get into our Amazon review. Now, sit tight, Brian. This is a long-ass review, but I wanted to do just this one review because it kind of includes everything that everybody was saying on the Amazon entry for this movie in one jam-packed review. So I'm like, fuck it. This is perfect. So this review is from Mr. A. Geach, who gives this 5 stars. And the header of the review says, a response to close-minded people. And the body of the review says, first, I wish to respond to the many negative reviews regarding this movie. Evidently, the people in this country do not learn their lessons, or they live with their heads in the sand. The main problem with all the negative reviews about this movie were the complaints of Tom Laughlin's self-importance and battering of the system. If any of those who wrote negatively here actually watched the movies, they would know that it states unequivocally that these movies are fictional reenactments of specific events that have been enhanced and expanded for the benefit of the movies. I am sure the same fools that have written their drivel here see nothing wrong with the enhancements, outright lies, and totally unrealistic events of many of the movies produced today, nearly 40 years after the Billy Jack series. This review was made in like 2008. In the second of this series, the beginning of the movies lists many of the events of that time where violence was used by our government against students who refused to allow the system to have so much control over a country that was supposed to be free. Perhaps some of you should rewatch this movie and look at the government you are living under today. We are on the edge of a recession. Once again, this was made in 2008, this review, so very prescient on this guy to predict the 2008 financial crisis months early. So that was...
Well, luckily, I mean, we're reading it now in 2023 and we're right back there. So
yeah, exactly.
He could have written it yesterday.
The wealthy are getting wealthier while driving more middle-class people into financial ruin. Child abuse is on the front page more and more. Healthcare for the normal family is so insanely expensive that either other necessities are done without or there is no medical coverage at all. But the very acts that were occurring at the time of these movies are still occurring today, and in many instances more so. Corporations and crooked politicians are robbing the people at an alarming rate. We are told that spying is needed to protect our nation, even though that spying can and is invading areas that our government has no right to insinuate themselves. BIA has so mismanaged Indian funds that the government has managed to lose billions of Indian dollars that simply state there's no way for them to accurately determine what has been stolen from them. The idiot that made the comments about the incident in Vietnam should get familiar with the atrocities that occurred during the war and many others. Now, just as light context here, when I said, or when this person said here about the incidents in Vietnam that this idiot was referring to, it was literally just like, well, in the movie, they say that White House aides and the White House are responsible, but it was actually only Lieutenant Calley that was responsible. It's like, it's basically the SpongeBob glasses meme where it's like, well, actually, that's basically what it is. Fucking idiot.
Yeah.
There have been very few times throughout history where the actual person or persons responsible for calling the shots has ever been prosecuted. It is the policy of our government and our military to blame and punish a few lower-level scapegoats in order to pacify the ignorant public, then proceed with business as usual. Look at what has happened during the war. The men and women in our military are trained to blindly follow orders. When they do it and it becomes public knowledge and the public is angered by it, they punish those very same people for carrying out the orders they were trained to follow. Their COs are not punished, but those that were expected to carry out the orders. Now, here's the thing. I know, obviously, and I'm interjecting here just for a little bit because the review is almost over, I promise. I know it's a long-ass review. Thing is, you do not have to follow an unlawful order. So punishing these people for following unjust rules is perfectly acceptable to me. Now, granted, the higher up should also get punished, but at the same time, let's not pretend that people who, like, just fucking did a white phosphorus on some random village should get leniency because they were just told to do it.
Well, it's not an either or. I would say, though, if you presented me the choice, if I had to choose who was going to get punished, if it could only be one and the other had to go 3, of course, I'd think it would be more beneficial and it would mean more for the higher ups to get. Like, I mean, it's easy for me to say, I'm not in the army or whatever. You don't have to follow those orders.
No.
Not just like you don't have to because they're unlawful. Like, you know, that's a choice that you make. And I'm not sure I'm equipped to pass like judgment on being in that moment. But I mean, those people aren't without sin in this discussion. That's a really weird way to phrase it.
It is, 100%. All right, very last paragraph here. The entire Billy Jack series are great and have watched with an open mind, and not just for thirst for action and violence, are quite thought-provoking. It is obvious by the state of our nation right now that people are so complacent that they have learned nothing from the past. The complacency of our people and corrupt politicians are totally responsible for 9/11, and they have learned nothing. So I didn't know that Hassan went and reviewed this like 15 years ago.
So I was actually, did like Tom Laughlin write this? Like, what?
Yeah. This is evident by the very candidates that are currently running for office. Not a one of them has the best interest of this country, the middle class, or the poor at heart. Now, this was also Obama running. So once again, very prescient on this guy to say that.
Yeah, this guy called it.
Freedom is what this nation was built on. And that was what the series tried to teach. When crooked law enforcement and politicians could so easily sweep away that freedom, we are no longer in control of our own lives, and we have no say in what happens to us. How much freedom do you have now, and how much control over our future? I'd say Washington, the oil companies, and corporate America have the control. Tom Laughlin attempted to stir people up in a way that would get people to watch, but obviously the message was lost to those who care more about action in the movies than action in the control of their lives. Done. Whew, that was a long review, I know. But I think it was very succinct on how I feel about this movie, about the positive reviews about this movie, and even very much shit on the negative reviews of this movie as well. So I think it's pretty much the perfect review, and I'm going to keep it at that.
It seems to have been reviewed by someone who, like, I'm reading this as like a boomer, someone who was young when these movies came out.
I would think so, yes.
I mean, the only like strong disagreement I have with that, as far as the film is concerned, I kind of think if there was more action in these movies, that they would be remembered more, and that maybe those messages would have stuck more.
Agreed.
As much as critics at the time and now still say, well, they're saying that it's a pro-peace movie, but then, you know, the hero is always kickboxing people. I'd hate to keep harping on it. If there was, both for like, you know, moral reasons and just for entertainment value, if there was more of Billy Jack beating the shit out of bad guys, I kind of think that message would get across stronger. It wouldn't be so wishy-washy.
Agreed, 100%. Yeah, I agree pretty much entirely with this review. I mean, whoever wrote this review was also a based lib, so I appreciate that quite a bit. And a pretty based lib, even for based lib standards. Like the fact that in 2008, this guy was like, yeah, not one of them actually care about the working class. That was a pretty impressive thing to say in 2008 and get that right on the money. So,
I mean, that guy probably within 6 months was all aboard on Obama.
Oh, 100%. Like, he definitely listened to that will.i.am song, that Change song or whatever. And
I was thinking of My President is Black.
Oh, yeah. And then speaking of reviews that have also aged, this one's aged very poorly. I'm going to highlight Gene Siskel's review of this film and just an excerpt from it. Now, Brian, I've told you my opinions on Gene Siskel. I fucking hate Gene Siskel. The fact that he died at his age, I don't feel bad. He was a fucking sanctimonious, elitist asshole. I fucking hate him. He
just had bad taste.
He does have horrible taste. And like, you know, we can talk about like, if you have bad taste or whatever, totally fine. Have bad film opinions, like whatever. Fucking anybody can have bad film opinions. But what really pisses me off about Gene Siskel the most, you're familiar with his review of the original Friday the 13th, right?
I am.
So to the audience at home who may not know, he essentially gave it a 0 stars, which that's in his right to review it poorly. But not only did he spoil the ending in his review, but he also doxed Betsy Palmer's address and asked for fans to harass her.
This nice old lady.
Yes. No matter how much you dislike a film, doxing somebody is completely fucking unacceptable.
Also, an actor? Like, I mean, it's unacceptable to anyone, but I'm just saying, like,
an
not
actor.
like Sean Cunningham?
Yeah. And also, like, it would never be okay no matter what. But she chose this role because she needed a new car.
A working actor who needed a job.
Just absolute scumfuckery. Like, honestly, if Gene Siskel would have been a really good fucking Nazi back in World War II, like, I'm not even exaggerating. Like, he would have been a perfect Nazi. Fuck Gene Siskel. But anyways, his review, and there's a reason why, like, I think most people, even if they disagree with some of his takes, like, I think Roger Ebert's takes on video games not being art are pretty fucking stupid, but I think...
Just an old guy. He's an old guy. He doesn't know, you know.
Just an old guy. But I do respect Roger Ebert quite a bit.
It's funny sometimes.
You know, he wrote one of the funniest movies of the 60s, the Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. That's a great movie.
Did he really?
Yeah, he wrote Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. That's a great movie.
I didn't even know that.
And also, just in general, like, you know, I think his tastes were generally pretty good. So I give Roger Ebert a pass, even on his stupid stuff. But there's a reason why people remember Roger Ebert fondly, and basically nobody remembers Gene Siskel anymore. But his review here, he gave it a 1 star out of 4, and he called it, quote, gross, misleading, and a run-on bore, unquote. Writing that, whereas the original had moments of genuine humor and refreshing improvisation, the Trial of Billy Jack comes on as totally committed to establishing half-truths. In reality, both My Lai and Kent State are testaments to the danger of arming young men and placing them in combat situations, but the Trial of Billy Jack twists those facts so as to make the killings a direct policy statement of the national government.
I'm so mad right now.
That's retarded.
This is fucking
retarded.
Dumb.
Like,
yeah. That is a deliberate misrepresentation of what those events are. Those were things that were ordered to be done. Those weren't lone wolves in units that went out and committed those shootings. Those were deliberate acts of violence on the behalf of a reactionary government. And he knows that. There's no way he didn't know that by 1974.
100%, yeah. Just scum. And it's one of those things where, like, you know, if some random redneck from small town Ohio was just like, he made the troops look bad, and, like, whatever. Like, obviously, that would be stupid, too. But, like, there's limited, like, real-world experience. No, Gene Siskel is from Chicago. Like, come on,
a huge platform, especially in the 70s.
just fucking awful. And like Gene Siskel himself, his reviews were not like meant to inform. They were basically just, hey, I'm a cranky fucking dumb reactionary asshole. Here's my opinion.
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that sucks.
In this instance, he is upset by what the movie's saying, and he's creating like counter propaganda against it, basically.
Yeah.
And he's being really smug and smarmy about it so that people will assume that he's smart.
Yeah. Once again, Gene Siskel, you're burning in hell. Fuck you. That is all I can say about Gene Siskel. So
Gene Siskel, hell. Tom Laughlin, heaven. Got my issues with Laughlin, but you know what? No. These movies, I'm not surprised that they did not do well critically, because A, there's problems with all of them. They're all messy. Also, like, they're martial arts, like, political treatises, you know? Like, I don't expect most film critics of the time to give these movies much of an appraisal.
yeah, exactly. 100%. Like, granted, I like this movie a lot. I actually didn't say my actual opinions on this film earlier, so I want to reiterate. I actually do like this movie quite a bit. I will say it's not my favorite Billy Jack movie. I would say Billy Jack's probably my favorite. But the one thing I could say about this film that, to be fair, I can say of Billy Jack as well, but definitely most of this film, as I've said earlier, this film is incredibly audacious. And you're right, it is Tom Laughlin's masterpiece. It is 100% his fucking
like when I
masterpiece.
say, thinking about it now, I think Billy Jack is my favorite just because it's a little bit more condensed. There is more action in it. There's just more of Billy Jack being cool and cocky.
And definitely more action per minute, too.
Yes, for sure. But this movie, you know, this is when Laughlin sat down and he was like, this is it. I'm putting it all out there.
You know, once again, we have to respect Tom Laughlin for doing that, like straight up. Like, as I think we've mentioned in both Born Losers and Billy Jack, like, he was a revolutionary filmmaker in a lot of ways in regards to what he was able and willing to show in his movies. And once again, like, this movie came out before Apocalypse Now, came out before Full Metal Jacket, obviously. It came out before the fucking Deer Hunter. This was probably the very first movie I can think of, like, big budget movie that was released nationally that showed the atrocities of things that happened in Vietnam while the war was still technically going on. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah. And again, I'm not saying this hyperbolically. There is no other franchise, no other film franchise in this world that is like the Billy Jack series. For better or worse, you will not see another series like it.
And, you know, I'm looking just to get my facts correctly. This movie came out 5 months before the fall of Saigon. So Vietnam was still very fresh in people's fucking memory. Like I said, technically it was still going on, but military operations were essential.
How many portrayals have there even been of Vietnam on film at that point? Other than, of course, The Green Berets, the only film made during the conflict. One of the most disgusting movies ever made.
Oh, man. You know, fun fact, my uncle was one of the first Green Berets, and he loves that movie.
I mean, I get why you would, I guess. That might be a good, not soon, but maybe somewhere down the line we'll talk about Green Berets, because that is we talk about reactionary movies sometimes.
But yes,
nasty piece of work.
100%. I would love to get into that someday. But yeah, so that is our review of The Trial of Billy Jack. Do we have any final thoughts before we end the night here?
I've said this in every Billy Jack installment previous. I'll say it again. These aren't movies for everyone. They aren't even movies I would just recommend or I'd say, oh yeah, they're really good. I love these movies. They're unlike anything else you'll see. I think Laughlin, mostly really cool, has some pretty serious hiccups. Of course, he probably wouldn't have played the main character himself or wouldn't have written him as a Native American had he done them now. His stance on militant kind of direct action is a big whiff, pretty condescending and pretty inconsistent with, the events he portrays on screen. Kind of seems like a gap in his understanding of history, but I like his movies. I think he was overall a positive influence on pop culture and a cool guy. I would say if you did not really like Born Losers and Billy Jack, like Billy Jack is the essential. I think any fan of cult cinema, fan of political message films, any fan of 70s martial arts, even though the martial arts is pretty light, should see Billy Jack. But if you don't like Billy Jack and Born Losers quite a bit, you maybe don't need to see this movie or Billy Jack Goes to Washington. I love them. I think there's an audience for them. I'm not going to sit there and go oh, everyone needs to watch them. I mean, this movie's fucking crazy.
It is absolutely crazy. And I will say I've liked all three Billy Jack movies so far. So whenever we get to Billy Jack Goes to Washington, I'll probably love it too.
I'm sure you can see the implication is that you'll get to see Billy Jack Paquitoing a bunch of congressmen.
Is that actually what happens in the movie?
No. I mean, it's still fun. It's my least favorite film in the series, but I like them all.
I want to see fucking Tom Laughlin do a flying kick at fucking Spiro Agnew. That's what I want to see.
Oh my God, yeah. Just fucking hit him right in the neck. One of those cool slow motion deaths you get, one of them in every film.
Oh God. I mean, well, speaking of, former Nixon appointees, I don't know if you saw, but a 100-year-old Henry Kissinger just spoke to Chinese officials the other day.
And I'm surprised he can still set foot there. I want that motherfucker dead so bad. I mean, I know that's not an original thought. He's going to live forever, though. Those people don't die.
Oh, no. Henry Kissinger will live for motherfucking ever.
Their black hearts pump out something beyond blood that will course through his veins long after we've all died. Hate keeps these people alive.
It does, 100%. And you know what? My hate for Gene Siskel will keep me alive forever.
At least until we finish the last Billy Jack episode.
Yes, 100%. And that's the thing, right? I mean, obviously, we're not to the prominence of Gene Siskel. I mean, we should be to the prominence of Gene Siskel, but we're not. But, I never want to be a Gene Siskel, reviewer. I may hate movies. I may shit on them, may call them every word, if and or but at the end of the day, I will never shit on an artist for making art.
I always want to be talking about movies because I'm interested in them. I want to look at them and uncynically and look at every side of them that I can think of. I want to take them for what they are, take the good with the bad and the bad with the good. And I don't want to be using someone else's or someone who's done a lot more work creating a movie than I've done watching it and talking about it. I don't want to use that as a platform to belittle anyone or prop myself up. And I kind of do think, I know this isn't original, I think that's what a lot of film criticism, both professional and amateur, is. It's defining what I like by what it is not, and I think that's a really boring way to look at art.
I will agree with that 100%. So we will do the best we can to never criticize artists just for making art. If it's bad, obviously we can make fun of that. But if you're just an artist doing your best, you know who's another good film reviewer who doesn't do that? Is Chris Stuckman. He's a guy that, even though I don't think he's a very interesting film reviewer, he'll always say, and he does this for the most part, he will criticize bad films, but he'll never just be well, this person's a bad person because they made a film I politically disagree with or whatever. He's I understand why they made these decisions. I simply disagree with it. And I'm I respect that.
The worst films, obviously, aren't ones that they tried really hard on and that weren't very good most of the time. To me, the thing that I'd rather watch more than anything is something that's just tossed off. That's the whole thing with movies like that Flash movie. I know exactly what it's going to be. I know exactly what I'm going to see. I know that it was focus tested and all to hell. I know that it was written basically by a committee based on a pre-existing property that had proven itself time and again. I have no problem talking shit about movies like that. The value's all been drained out of it. It's going to make its money. People that want to see it are going to see it.
Well, The Flash is not going to make its money. That's the thing. At least specifically. The Flash is one of the biggest box office bombs of all time.
No, but movies like that have
but
that
movies
sort
like that, though, yes.
You know what I mean? It's they've been cranked out in that way. It's I have no problem looking at a movie like that and going oh, this is some bullshit. And I still want to watch it. If I see a movie like that, and I still want to take it at face value and try to take it on its merits. But when you get a film that's just strange, that's low budget, that's made by some really weirdly ambitious kind of visionaries, you kind of have to look at it differently. There's different things that you're looking for. That's how I feel about the Billy Jack movies. You're looking at these movies because someone really put himself into them, put all of himself into them. And you see the good and the bad, and you see just really he put it all on the line for this thing he believed in.
I couldn't agree more. I fucking couldn't agree more, 100%. And, that's the thing about a lot of, the quote-unquote, most infamous bad movies of all time, Troll 2 or The Room or, whatever. Regardless of those films' quality, and obviously those films are pretty bad quality-wise, but those are movies that people put their heart, especially The Room. Tommy Wiseau put his heart and fucking soul into that movie.
Yeah, and that does make for a more enjoyable viewing experience, even if it's because it's funnier that way. When the people that were making the product cared about it and were trying, that's in some way that's going to be compelling because you're seeing a reflection of those people on screen, even if it's a fucking movie like Troll 2. That's how you get those crazy fucking weird performances and those bizarre acting choices, is because those actors who weren't super experienced were really putting themselves out there to make it.
Exactly.
A much more compelling viewing experience than what's some shitty movie.
Trying to think of a shitty movie that just came out that I saw. Are you talking about a shitty movie that's not so bad it's good, just a piece of shit movie?
Yeah, just a bad movie. Just a boring movie. St. Elmo's Fire.
The Joel Schumacher
Yeah,
movie?
yeah, I don't like that one.
I would love to review. I mean, we're obviously going to review
I'm a
8
Schumacher
millimeter at some
apologist
point.
as well. You know that.
And of
but
course,
I
we
don't.
mentioned the phone booth movie. Like, Joel Schumacher is an incredibly divisive filmmaker to me because he's made some of my favorite and some of my least favorite movies of all time. Like,
Made
he's
8
hilarious.
millimeter, Phone Booth, and Batman Forever, which are all awesome. There's other movies by him I think they like that I can't think.
Do you like
But,
The Wiz?
I haven't seen it.
The Wizard of Oz adaptation with all black people in it?
No, I mean that's supposed to be a great movie, but I haven't seen it yet.
I mean, it's got Michael Jackson in it and
It's
Diana
got
Ross.
all kinds of incredible people in it. Yeah.
I mean, how bad could it really be?
I mean, I think that actually is, I think, like a really good movie, is from what I understand. I haven't seen it yet, though, but I hate St. Elmo's Fire. I think it sucks shit.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sidney Lumet directed The Wiz, but he wrote the screenplay.
Did he?
Yeah, Joel Schumacher wrote the screenplay, but Sidney Lumet directed it. Sidney Lumet is also a great filmmaker.
That name doesn't ring any bells for me.
He directed 12 Angry Men.
Okay, so that, like, objectively a great film. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like, I never need to see it again, but yeah, it's good, of course.
Oh, yeah. Classic film.
It's like saying that, like, the Beatles are good, you know?
Yeah, I mean, classic Henry Fonda movie. And also, talk about the Billy Jack movies. It's also got E.G. Marshall, who was in Billy Jack Goes to Washington.
I'm excited to finish the Billy Jack series. We're going to obviously take breaks between them, and we're going to continue going down some kind of different avenues and talking about different things. Me and Taylor have been talking. We have some cool things we're kind of brewing up ideas for. But I've actually, most of the research I've been doing, I've done on Tom Laughlin, which has been kind of difficult because there's no definitive biography of him written that I can find anywhere. I've been saving for Billy Jack Goes to Washington because I have some really interesting stuff about his life and career post Billy Jack. And I think we'll really dive into his life and, you know, his personal life and his accomplishments on Billy Jack Goes to Washington. I've been saving it mostly for then. That seems like the best time. I'm really excited to get to that.
And I know, at least for the next episode, my pick, Brian, it's going to make us really angry.
It's going to make us two angry men.
It's going to make us the most anger you could possibly have in a review.
Yeah.
For the audience at home, you'll figure it out once we release that episode. But considering we're old-ass millennials and we have to go to bed, I think it's probably a good time to sign off here. Brian, do you have anything to plug before we sign off here?
Follow me on Twitter, John Stab, JONSTABB, JLo Biafra on Instagram. I don't know. I'm not doing much beyond this podcast. Just listen to the podcast, read my stupid posts on Twitter, and yell at me when I say things about movies you don't like.
Agreed. And this is Taylor signing off here. You can follow me at Carlos Chantor on Twitter.com. I don't post anything else either, but I also, at this point, I'm liking posts about the new upcoming Saw movie and liking photos of various e-girls. So if you want to see those, feel free to.
Nice. Oh, I'll have to go browse your faves.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.